right, record. Okay, so rather than setting context with the long spiel around the origin of campfires and the yarn, we're going to just kind of jump into something that hopefully will embody us into the same context in some sense. If anybody's interested in hearing about the origin story of Campfire Talks and the yarn, I've got some links to videos where I've shared that. The first and second Campfire Talks for the Great Lakes Basin were two examples, and where I post this recording, I'll share links to those as well. So I want to invite everybody to close your eyes if you'd like to. You don't have to, but I want to try to paint a picture to try to bring us into the Great Lakes Basin. I don't know what the temperature is there today, but I'm guessing it's cold. So imagine that it's not that cold. Okay.
No, it's like 45, 50 degrees. It's really nice.
Wow. Okay. All right. Well, that changes things because I don't have to focus quite as much on warming us up. So we're meeting with some light jackets at the edge of a forest. This forest has some oaks, some ash, some beech, some pine. So it's a mix of defoliated, open deciduous trees because it is winter time, and we've got some evergreens, some coniferous as well in there with the pine. And there is a narrow pathway, and we walk it together. We are a little ways north and a little ways west of Toronto on the Niagara Escarpment. And as we walk through the forest, we come to an opening, and the opening reveals a little crag, a little part of the granite of the escarpment that's exposed. And it is to the north of us. And we walk up to it with our light jackets, not feeling too cold, unseasonably warm. But since we're going to be standing here for an hour and a half anyways, we might as well warm up. And we see a fire ring. And it's right against the wall. So once we get this fire going, we'll be able to radiate heat back onto the group and stay extra warm. And so we see some kindling beside the fire ring. We begin to kneel down and build the fire together as we share with one another the things that we've been participating in the Great Lakes Basin or in our respective bioregions. And we build a shared purpose as we build the fire to be in service to all that is happening right now in the Great Lakes Basin, as Joe and Penny are traveling around, meeting people, being the reason for existing community organizers to come together with new energy and new purpose. I'll say purpose for the third time today because we want to feel in this campfire how having a strong shared purpose naturally brings us into a sort of pro-social dynamic together. So we've got the fire going now, and let's have a conversation for a while in service, like I said, to these landscapes. And with that, I'd like to invite everybody to open their eyes, look at the others around the fire, and then we'll do check-ins. And in check-ins, love to hear what's coming up for everyone with regards to the bioregional activations in the Great Lakes Basin. Are you participating? What have you done to participate? What are you feeling into after maybe Joe and Penny have left in the case of Preston, Toronto, or if there's something else that's really present for you that you want to bring in, I want to invite that as well. And so through the course of check-ins, we'll feel into where the dialogue wants to begin. And speaking of beginning, does anybody want to kick us off with the intro and then go ahead and pass it along? Claire, how about you?
Sure. I think right now I've just been inspired by the talks that I have attended. And I'm much more just interested to hear from the people who have been going. I'm excited by just sort of, it feels like a flurry behind the scenes of some of the activity that I'm party to. And it's just, sometimes in the chat, you connect with people who in the Zoom chat because I'm here digitally. But people like Hillary van Welten was really, I just thought that she made some, I think she had some conversations with you, Preston. I don't know. Or is she just on digital Zoom? I don't know if she's attended anything in person. Anyway, yeah, and then the community art conversation just keeps coming up, and I feel like I'm really excited to explore how to start making that fit into the greater conversation. It just keeps bubbling up from all corners, and that's exciting. Yeah, and then I think what's happening as well is it's starting to kind of sort of, it feels like they're little what do you call it, sparks that are starting to take off here in anticipation of what we're seeing happening in the Great Lakes. And yeah, I think we learn from each other. So I think just even, you know, just the more we hear what's going on, how we're learning from each other, just gives us, it inspires us for what's possible here. And so, yeah, so I'm interested in just mostly listening to what's coming up today. So I will pass to Jonathan.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much. I'm anxious to hear from the people who have been at the events in person as well. We're just deep in the planning for Joe and Penny to arrive, keeping track of the RSVPs, looking at creating name tags and other things like this to have people immediately be able to interact with each other once they come together. And we do have a lot of people coming together for the events. So that's great. And just came off an interesting conversation about Vivero in the context of the Giveth platform, which is, you know, it's always interesting meeting people who are in the crypto and Web3 space, speaking almost a different language. And so let me pass it over to Preston.
Hello, everybody, and hi, Diane. We're just doing a quick little walkthrough of checking in, so it'll get past you eventually, but nice to see you here. So sort of leaving off, we're on a check-in where Benji just did that imagining walk up the escarpment, the fire, etc. I'm reminded of how this time of year, I think this first week of February is a period of between the solstice and the equinox. So it's celebrated by many cultures as a transitionary period as we begin to look forward. And that the warm weather I noticed yesterday with the slightly longer days, I'm left in that position where I'm a little bit confused because it's nice to have the slightly longer days and the warmth and the melting. It seems very spring-like, but at the same time, one always, for at this point in life, there's always this question of whether this is out of season or what the scenario is. So I always get that sort of back and forth between being happy about it and a little bit confused as to whether I should really be in that position or not. So yes, but I'm not going to dig too much yet into the conversation about the events, but I can say that I'm definitely steeping in a lot of what happened last week and thinking a lot about reaching out slowly to some of the people that have met during those events, and very curious to see what begins to bubble forth. So now is that contemplation and quiet and steeping time. I will pass off to Richard.
Hi everyone. Yeah, I'm curious to find out more about the Great Lakes as well. And I kind of noticed myself over the other side of the pond, and and kind of different things have been happening here, but connected with David Sloan Wilson doing his UK tour to give his talk at the Royal Society of Arts, and doing a road trip on the way, and and spending time with my community, which was lovely. And also Mila came with him as well, and it was lovely to see Mila in the flesh. And Mila connects my world and lots of people's worlds in lots of different ways, through pro-social, through earth regenerators, and also Regenesis, the regenerative practitioner, which she spoke so highly of. So that was lovely, just to have food and spend time with them, and make pro-social explicit in my community group, where it's just been implicit so far. And it's cool. Love to see what's happening with David, Joe, Penny linking up, and everyone else all coming together beautifully. So that's me, and I will pass to Anna.
Thanks, Richard. I have really enjoyed listening to the RSA talk that David gave last week, and then listening to Joe's talk when he went to Binghamton, so yesterday or 2 days ago. So yeah, it's been nice kind of keeping track of their movements, and over to see you. And I am also busy with all of the trips. I'm planning on going to Cleveland tomorrow for the day, and then over to Rochester. So I'm kind of following Joe and Penny around. They called me their groupies the other day, and that's what I definitely feel like. But I'm excited to see them again, and just definitely being able to talk to them a bit more, and getting to be a guest in all these different regions is pretty cool. I also am starting to help out with for you guys in the Great Lakes region. There's the Birds on the Niagara, that's essentially celebrating all the winter migrating birds along the Niagara Escarpment. It's an international festival. I think they're trying to push up towards Toronto. I don't know how many events there are up there, but they're primarily like Niagara Falls and Buffalo area. So that's at the end of the month, so I'm helping out with that as well. There's a lot of free outdoor events and guided nature hikes, and also just community events too. So that's been a really nice helping out with that after having all of these talks. And they are run by some people who do follow bioregionalism. And I'm hoping that some of them are able to attend the Rochester discussions virtually, some of the people that I've been talking to. So very busy this month, but enjoying it at the same time. I'll pass it over to Diane. I think you might be the only one who hasn't gone yet.
Hi, thank you. I am very, very new and invited here thanks to Preston, having met him at an event on Saturday in Caledon, Ontario. And because I am so new, I am feeling inclined to deep listening mode. And if you'll forgive that, I will be very pleased. And I mean, I can give a brief introduction so that you guys know where I'm coming from, but otherwise I will probably be very quiet.
That would be great, Diane. Yeah, and in any way that you feel comfortable, you are welcome. Yeah.
Okay. So I live in what is colonially known as Burlington, Ontario. And I am feeling for Turkey and Syria this week, having experienced the light shaking of the earth very recently, when there was the category 4.2 or 3.8, depending who you ask, in Buffalo. The other morning at 6:15, I was up. I happened to be taking notes, and I heard the windows shaking, and I didn't feel it. but there was very little on Twitter or anything at the time. And then later that day, the horrific quake news from the other side of the world unfolded. And so I've been a little, not entirely preoccupied with that lately, but very conscious of that signal. And other than that, I just came off a meeting, which is a mid-month prep meeting for our end-of-month regular meetings for the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee with Society for Ecological Restoration International. And so I come to that through studies in ecological restoration at the University of Waterloo, and have a very in-depth interest as a language learner for Ojibwe, which is important in this particular bioregion. And I have to say, I'm really quite thrilled to have been made aware of an organization that is operating on this particular organization level, beyond the political boundaries. And so it's lovely. The only place I've really encountered it in a systematic way before now is in all the listening I do to Indigenous-led entities. And so it's nice to see it here as well, and to have found this very interesting social connection. I'm still interested in learning about the scope of this network on the kind of global basis, because I volunteer with SER International, which could be a very interesting set of perspectives to bring to this networking effort. And yeah, I'm just definitely early learning stages about trying to understand how this whole network comes together. And with that, I will stop being brief.
Funny. Well, it's great to have you here. And if at any point in time in this conversation you feel like you want to become more of a speaker than a listener, invitation is open. But yeah, great to have you. And I guess I'll check in just very briefly and say I'm just feeling into how can we create spaces for ongoing support and for the conversation to continue in the many different ways that it wants to, and amongst the many different groups and the many different scales. There's so much complexity when such a large geographical region is suddenly having these bi-regional conversations. Not that they didn't exist already, but there is something about the activation that Joe and Penny bring, the invitation to come together in new ways. So having a conversation with Brian and Susan at the Legacy Project on Friday about a conversational container they're going to hold on Saturday for the Toronto area to explore how we can continue. And it'll be an interesting prototype opportunity for me to feel into models for how we can do this elsewhere. So yeah, I won't say anything more. There's been a lot of things that have come up already. Are we feeling as a group any particular thread to tug on first in conversation, to follow first?
I guess mostly I'm interested in what's coming up for Jonathan, if anything's starting to come out of the woodwork. Jonathan, Anna, you said yours is coming, right? Your event.
Yes, we're expecting Joe on Friday, Joe and Penny on Friday afternoon, and our first event is Friday evening at a location called Greentopia, which is graciously offered to not only host us, but to provide wine and cheese for folks showing up. So that's going to be a fun thing. And then Joe and Penny are staying with us at our house. And the following morning, Saturday morning, we're going on a field trip, taking them up and down the Genesee River and to Lake Ontario, and then back again to Rochester for an afternoon session at the public library in the center of the city of Rochester, for a couple of hours of reflections and thoughts about next steps. And then Sunday morning, we're having a potluck brunch at our house. So, which is sort of reprises some of the activities that we've done in the past in organizing people. It's always a special thing to have people come together, bring their dishes and share the food with each other. And this is our first time doing it since we've moved to Rochester. So all kinds of things are emerging out of these, out of this visit, particularly long-term relationships with people locally, getting to know folks like Anna, we did not really know before at all, or Preston. And so it's a great way in which these the impetus of the actual trip and the visit, you might say it doesn't mean anything in the larger universal scheme of things, but it really does in the sense of human presence. And that triggers all kinds of other things that occur. And so it's opening up for us to have conversations with people about the meaning of all of this. And that's really wonderful. We had a great discussion this morning in our Right Livelihood event with folks from someone from Europe and someone from who is now in Colombia. So, you know, and all of this is enormously enriching for both Victoria and I.
Yeah, I also agree, Jonathan. I mean, I haven't been engaged in all of the conversations, but Victoria just looped me into an email with somebody who is out in Buffalo, who's working on sustainable and affordable housing out here. She's inviting to the meeting, but like looping me in with him because he's out here with me in Buffalo. So definitely feel like it's been a great catalyst to start a lot of these relationships.
Also, yeah, I've been watching a lot of the old learning journeys that Joe put together in the early ER days, as we prepare the launch of the design school on March 1st, and been going through a lot of pro-social stuff. I mean, it's so fascinating how Joe has been speaking about this stuff so eloquently and in such a bioregional way for so long. It's like his tune hasn't changed at all. It's just it's like actualizing, it's realizing right now. And I just wanted to say that you know, as we talk about these newly forming relationships and think about these, you know, ongoing containers, Richard mentioned that you know, in his group, pro-social went from implicit to explicit. You know, really focusing on cultivating an awareness of what it means to be in deep collaboration and in pro-sociality. I just wanted to point to that as something that's so important at this stage, that's so important to bake in so deeply into our purpose and our orientation together. You know, what it is thematically or geographically that we feel compelled to gather around, to form our groups around. You know, really it's underneath that all about learning how to form effective collaborative groups. That's really what it's all about, and doing it at really small, like these individual relationships that we're forming, that we're creating. It's like, that's the most important thing right now, because we have to figure out how to be pro-social at the smallest scales and then grow up from there systemically. So I just wanted to point that out because, you know, I've been watching all these learning journeys. It's just so present for me right now. Claire.
Yeah, that's what was coming up for me, actually. What you were speaking to was kind of noticing a few things that, you know, I meet with some people, we sort of drawn together through systems thinking and that kind of, and so all of our discussions are kind of around that. one of the things that just I'm continually floored by is just, we'll be talking about seeing things from a systems perspective. And there are people who are involved in big systems, whether the healthcare system in Canada or sort of academic or whatever. And we start talking about the things that are working, and then it starts to go to the place where all the stuff that shuts it down. And it's like systemically, all those things, as soon as you start to get a spark going, it shuts it down. But there's a kind of sort of cyclical part to it. It's like almost like a defeat, being defeated. And to me, it's like we need to kind of, I guess in those groups of people, they're the ones who are thinking systemically, and they're getting caught in the shutdown of the lack of possibility. And so it seems to me that the creating the connections that happen during these all these events, and the new networking and the new possibility, it's what do we do to be able to not allow it to just get shut down? Like, to me, that is part of why these are sparks that just, in order for them to actually catch actually start a fire, there needs to be something that kind of helps to get us out of that loop. And I just wanted to kind of bring that up, and just to say how important that next step of the pro-social, which to me gives the tools to start actually working effectively in a cooperative way, but to also realize that none of the existing systems work, and to kind of start to imagine. Anyway, I'm speaking to the converted. It's just seeing it in real life. And, even though I've shared so much of what Joe's book we've been doing, they've kind of really latched onto that. I'm really upset that they didn't go to the Joe's stuff, because they've been so interested in it, and some of them are based in Toronto. But oh well, the conversations keep going on. I still feel like I'm trying to link them with the Legacy Project, because the work they're doing, especially in Indigenous epistemology, and the work that they're doing, and the reports some of them are working on, like, to me, it would be fantastic to get that link going. So I'll just keep trying. But yeah, anyway, I just wanted to bring that in.
Yeah, Preston.
Yeah, I think there's some really fascinating aspects about what's unfolding. But before I get too far into that, I wanted to sort of put a little picture of how I ended up meeting Diane. And I think it's really lends itself to this aspect of pro-social and the aspect of all voices at the table. I've gone to, I think I went to all or listened to all but one of Joe's presentations while he was here in the GTA. And several of those ones I went to, I actually wore a sweater and had hashtag land back, or then I once said the future is Indigenous, knowing how much this parallels Joe's philosophy and ideology. But that day I had decided, being a little bit further north into slightly outside of the core Toronto area, I wasn't sure I wanted to be that outspoken myself, so I didn't wear anything that was going to be so provocative. But Diane actually, at the end of the presentation, stood up and spoke quite eloquently, and I hope she doesn't mind me mention, she spoke words of the Ojibwe language, and commented very specifically about the need to be reflecting on these cultural aspects. And so then henceforth afterwards, I definitely wanted to meet with her. And so had those little events not happened, Diane and I would not have been put in contact. We would not have started these conversations together. So this is that aspect of the little bits of the grassroots that come together. And I think that's sort of the larger, bigger picture of what's happening here. And I heard Brian speak about it a couple of times with the Legacy Project, is there's the grassroots aspect where there's those of us that are self-selecting to be at these presentations. And therefore, Joe's really speaking to mostly the converted on this topic already. and then does such a wonderful job of weaving it in such a way that it creates a huge amount of inspiration. So the OCAD and this last one, Caledon, basically he had a standing ovation at a certain point, or at least a good group of people that were standing up that excited about what he was speaking about. But then there's the top-down aspect. And so Legacy Project is still very heavily trying to work with the existing systems, the existing structures. And within that, even if the structures aren't there, are people within it that are very excited about these prospects. And so that's being taken to some degree as trying to, you're trying to find that place in the middle where it all works from these two different approaches. So that I think that's sort of the whole bigger picture. And I think what I'm watching, and it's hard to say at this point, having listened to Joe's stuff so many times, I think it's gaining more and more traction as it goes. The presentation he did in Binghamton was about 45 people online, as well as the audience that was in person, which I think was supposed to be well over 100 people. So the aspect of everybody sees something, hears something, and then invites more people into the loop. It's I think it seems to be really building some interesting steam. And I'm getting that impression from what the few comments he's made on social media about the whole thing. So now it's about these campfires, and it's about the other processes that are already embedded here in the Mighty Networks, trying to find our pathways through what builds, what works together, what fits our particular approach in this pathway and story, and then how that relates on the ground. And that's going to take a little bit longer, I think, to really see and figure out. But definitely this whole group of people here, I didn't know any of them until starting in December. So we're building some pretty good steam, I think.
Friendships too, Preston. Richard.
I connected very much to to what you said, Preston, and also to your last words, Benji, as well. David Sloan Wilson in his talk at the RSA was talking about combining bottom up with enlightened top down. And so his talk at the RSA, the Great Hall was packed, 250 people. They had to make extra space, and there were over 1,000 people watching in total online. So a massive signal as well. Lots of people talking about it. And Benji, what you were saying, the last words about friendship. When David met with our small group and made pro-social explicit in our group, I was quite worried about that initially. My mind was saying that people are going to think I've been manipulating them to get all these things working, so I shared my mind and shared how we have become really strong friends. You can really feel that within the group. We all really deeply trust one another. We would be there for each other. So there's that very strong from the bottom up. And if we could just combine it more with that enlightened top down, the RSA as just one example, with everything else that has 20,000 fellows all over the world. Just all of these relationships connecting all across the world. Just excited to see where that goes.
Claire.
So my mic go. Gail Burkett, who is part of Earth Regenerators, brought up something in book club at Earth Regenerators has been a very, very rich environment for looking at different books that really bring in thinking that it just expands where we're at right now. We've been doing a combination of robin wool chimeras, braiding sweetgrass, and Becoming Wild by Carl Serafina, and sort of we've been alternating that. But anyway, she brought into it, kind of prompted her to sort of say, you know, as a daily practice, what are the creatures that you've had an encounter with today? And what if we shared the stories of those encounters when we saw each other? And it was so, it related to the chapter we'd just done in the Braiding Sweetgrass book, but it just really highlighted to all of us that things like that become invisible when we don't pay attention to them. And that daily practice, when you're talking about bottom up, Richard, to me, it's the daily encounters at like being present in that actual reality and being able to communicate it to each other in all kinds of ways. And I mean, to me, that's where the community art piece comes in. It's just part of that continuum. It's it's also the being together, you know, having food, sharing food together, the ritual piece, but those daily practices and they build trust, but they're real, and no one can actually take that away. And it's an incredibly solid foundation. In fact, way more solid than anything else that gets built after that, because the other stuff that gets built over the, like beyond that is abstracted. It's like the map is not the territory. And right now, I think we have to pay attention to connecting the map to the territory. The map's useful, but yeah, having our feet firmly planted in the territory is what we need, and daily practices, and yeah, are really, really what's important. I just really wanted to bring that in when you're talking about bottom up. And what Gail prompted us to do, I think we've kind of forgotten how to do those things. They've kind of out of, you know, people in the past, different cultures have actually had those daily practices where or community practices where they collectively held them. We don't have communities helping us hold those daily practices together. We're going to have to learn them. And I think that's like, that is a bit of a difference from what we've been talking about today. But if we don't integrate those, I think they're part of the continuum of everything else.
Blair, do you want to invite somebody to step into that practice right now?
Well, I mean, it's unless others have got something that they'd like to say about the Great Lakes conversation. I mean, that is something to think about. Maybe even just as a prompt to sort of get us in at a different level is if you have had an encounter with a creature. And you know what, I can start off and just see who would like to pick it up from there.
Yeah, it'd be great to model it. Thank you.
Yeah. Is so Robin's, the chapter had been about Robin and her students, and they'd gone out with flashlights in the middle of the night. It was raining. It was rural, and they noticed that there was a migration of salamanders and frogs across the road. And she called the chapter Collateral Damage because the road was, the cars were coming and they were basically squishing these creatures. And some of the people driving on it, anyway, that's beside the point. But it's just, they may not be bad people. We're just driving, but we're doing we have unintended consequences. And when I was driving up to the eco village, I had that really freshly in my mind. I was pouring with rain, and I noticed these frogs hopping across the road. And it suddenly made me aware that I was right by where the eco village is, and I hear the frogs, and they, because I've been here in the summer, I haven't heard them in the winter, but I've heard them, and the chorus is so loud, and sort of realizing, oh my God, I'm just driving. And so I slowed right down and suddenly became aware of making space for, the other than human that I tend to be just blind to. So my story. Hello, Mitty. Welcome. I'm just giving a prompt to, I don't think you were there when Gail was talking about sharing stories of the creatures that we've encountered recently, just as a practice of paying attention.
I love, so we've got a couple hands. We can hear from Richard and hear a bit from the UK, and then Anna, and then actually I'd like to share one too. This is fun. Richard, over to you.
Yeah, we have dunnocks in the UK, which are very small, like robin-sized birds. I don't know whether they are in the US as well, but there's one that keeps landing on my wife's office windowsill and starts singing through the window. And she's in her office, trying to do her work on the computer. And I put a link to dunnocks in the chat. But there's this beautiful little dunnock that is just singing through the window at her. And she called me in today to have a look as well. We're not sure what it's doing. We're not sure whether it can see itself in the reflection of the window, and the birds are really sort of, pairing up for mating. There's a real increase in bird song at the moment with the lighter days. But it's just, a really beautiful little encounter, with this, wonderful creature.
That's great. Sharing the song. Anna.
Yeah. First of all, I just wanted to say, Claire, I love that that chapter from Braiding Sweetgrass. I love her descriptions of just when she like picks up the salamanders, and I thought that was such a sweet thing that she does with her daughters. Yeah, I love that chapter. And my creature is also singing birds. I've always been, whenever you walk by like a bush or a tree where it's just full of birds singing, I've always really loved that. And it happens that the house that I live next door to have these massive, pretty overgrown bushes, but they're always full of birds. And when it's cold, they go quiet, but since it's warmed up today, I've just been watching them outside of my window, and every time I go outside, I can just hear them all chirping in that bush, and it's very peaceful, and it's a sign of spring. So it's just it's my story.
So mine is has to do with the people in my life as much as the critters around me. I'm here in Arizona helping out with my cousin and her kids, and her kids are 9 and 5, and they've spent the vast majority of their life deep within suburbia, and so they don't, as far as I can tell, they don't have a really deep nature connection, but they're kids, and so that's like readily available to them still. And they're excited to dig around in the dirt and cover their face in all sorts of random things, and it's funny how they're ready to dive in. But I have been trying to just explore every opportunity with them to think about plants and animals and their surroundings and the sky and anything that comes up. And the desert's been blooming recently, so that's been something that's coming up a lot. And yesterday I picked them up from school, and it was 2:30, and we're driving back, and it's traffic, it's chaos. I'm at a red light. There's some guy who cuts me off. He's flipping off the person in front of him, and I look over, and there's a canal, and there's a bird that surfaces, and it has a long neck. It was kind of like an egret. I don't know what it was, and it's got a fish in its mouth. And I pointed it out, and both Luca, the 9-year-old in the front seat, and Layla in her booster chair in the back, they both saw it, and they were so excited. and we talked about it the rest of the day. And it was just this little moment where the natural world showed itself like deep within the concrete jungle, deep within suburbia, and made such a big impact on them. So that was a cool moment. Preston, over to you.
Sure. So currently living very much in the urban infrastructure of Toronto, tiny little property, 18 feet wide, I kind of mentioned, just because the idea of space and greenery is very tight. The only place you get greenery is when you go to the parks and ravines and such. But my formative years were very much rural, semi-rural. So I got a bit of a mixture of both. And as I was redoing the landscaping here, I realized the journey started reading more Indigenous authors. So Tyson Yunkaporta, we've all mentioned a few times, with Sand Talk, Robin Wall Kimmerer afterwards, a lot of others. But the whole starting to view the living beings around you as not being at war with them, because the colonial perspective is pretty much, from everything I remember, is being at war. And so we've got raccoons in the area, we have squirrels in the area, and everybody is in this constant fight to prevent them from doing what they naturally do, which is incredibly ironic, because obviously we're not going to win these wars. So there's been just a shift to realizing, the squirrels are there. And so I put a bird feeder out and set it up in such a way that when the birds feed at the bird feeder, then they throw a bunch of seeds down, and that, actually allows the squirrels access to that. So they get a little bit of feed off of that system. And then that's in a spot where I made sure there was a bit of a place where the water would collect, a bit of a retaining space for rainwater. And I thought, okay, now that we're getting, bird droppings and seeds, that water will now soak a lot of nutrients into the soil in that spot and help the tree that's there. So the whole journey just became this much broader picture of how do we live in such a way as to be conducive to these forms of life. Now, we're all happy about a few pollinators, but it doesn't just stop at the butterflies. It's a much bigger picture. So I've been trying to sort of reevaluate each step of my life and what we're doing, and trying to change those conversations with the neighbors so that we can all be approaching this just a little bit differently, a little bit more, that we're sharing this world. Anyway.
Yeah, Diane, over to you. Perhaps Diane stepped away, or her mute button is malfunctioning.
No, I didn't know.
Oh,
Yeah, I didn't unmute. I'm sorry. I'm just I'm usually the secretary, so I'm writing down what everybody else is saying instead of saying my things. So, okay. I went to a course that was offered virtually in sort of deep lockdown. It was from the west coast of Canada, and it was Canoe teachings from Clackwick, in Clackwood Sound, basically, the traditional owners. And the Canoe teachings are about the cultural framework of represented in what we call the totem poles. And so it was a set of teachings about all the cultural learnings of the totem poles, and there was a lot to it. And the one homework item that we were given that's relevant here is that we were given an instruction, and we never came back to it except receiving that instruction in one of our lessons. And it was so worth it, even though we never took it up or revisited any of it. But I took that seriously, and I went up the hill to a local wetland that has a bit of a boardwalk, and it's just below the Niagara Escarpment. And if you're not from around here, that is a very significant biodiversity reserve recognized at the UNESCO United Nations level. We have kind of a local responsibility to care for that particular space. And so on the boardwalk, just below the escarpment, that is that core feature of the Biosphere Reserve, I decided to make friends with a particular shrub that I had seen there for a long time, but I decided it was going to be the being with which I developed a relationship. And it was earlier in the spring. And so I took my camera, because I'm old school like that, and I actually have a camera, not a phone camera. And I took pictures any day that I could get up there. And so I watched that plant come to life, almost on a day by day basis, and watched it emerge. And it was a pussy willow. And I watched it blossom and have its lovely white blooms, and then how they aged and grew and changed. And I had been watching that plant for a while, but it is really a personal connection of mine in the biotic universe and neighborhood now.
Oh, that's fun. And you missed the context setting, but I took us on an imaginal journey through the forest to the Niagara Escarpment, and that's where we're pretending to have our campfire today.
I'm so sorry.
No, you're it's fine. No, we encourage people to come to the campfire whenever they can. I just wanted to point out the coincidence.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it was. Yeah, it just happened to be right under the escarpment right now.
How funny. Yeah, how fun to pick a plant to develop a relationship with. That reminds me of when I did my permaculture design course and was spending tons of time observing and just spending time with like specific plants, but I never came back to the same one over and over. That's a really interesting exercise.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yeah, I still have, we did Jamboard stuff. And so I had put up some of my pictures, and, I have the kind of seasonal sequence and the dates, and I can still get into that Jamboard and, go back to my little photo album. So that was fun. And I would strongly encourage anyone else who feels so inclined, to do the same kind of thing. Because there's a lot of iNaturalists that's kind of their one picture from that second and their identification from that moment. And yeah, it's not, it reminds me of when I used to work in outdoor education, in situations where a field trip would come once and you would get to start the relationship with one group of students, and it would start from scratch again every time. And it's been very rewarding to me in post-secondary settings when you get to work with students throughout year after year after year of their academic progress. It's a beautiful experience, and so I did really enjoy applying it more intentionally to my neighbor plant beings as well.
Yeah, Claire.
Yeah, I would just love to say I just really appreciated and enjoyed hearing your stories. And I thought I would just, my mom is one of the wisest people that I know. She's just amazing, actually. She's lived a pretty interesting life, and she's figured out so much stuff and can bring so much in. And I went to visit her the other day, and she said she'd had the most profound experience where I guess she'd gone to some group thing. She's always learning, and they'd been asked to pick up a leaf and to think about the relationship of that leaf. It's like just the connections. And anyway, I remember the leaf. I can't remember the full conversation. But the thing that really struck me, and what struck me about what she was saying to me, was just how she had never thought about that before. She just hadn't actually been prompted to look at it in that way. And to me, my mom is one of the most incredible people at making connections and thinking about things in systemic ways. And this was kind of a new thing for her. And I just think what we've just been doing is, it isn't part of what we normally do, and we do need to kind of introduce it and just appreciate everybody taking the prompt. So
Yeah, Richard.
Yeah, thank you, Claire. Yeah, I love that. And I just always find it amazing myself how you can just have a new perspective, a new relationship with something at any time. It's just seeing something with open eyes. And I was thinking about my experience with my mother-in-law recently. We've been doing some walks looking at fungi in the autumn because she particularly loves fungi. And recently my wife and I have been reading Gathering Moss, and we shared the book with her, and she was like, yeah, I'm not going to get interested in moss. It's just not gonna, no, there's something about it, I won't be interested in it. And then we did a moss walk, and now she can't stop looking at moss, and it's her relationship has completely shifted. And so the other day we were walking around the lake, the three of us, and we were the slowest people walking around this lake with our little hand lenses looking at all the moss around. And even yesterday my wife and I went to an animal park where we've been so many times with our children, and we were seeing all of the things we'd never seen before. There was an old like Greek statue, and there was some little moss hair growing from the top of its head. So it's wonderful when your eyes are open to something new, and then you just can't stop seeing it. So.
Really?
So, yeah, I was late, it quotes, to the fire, and had just come from a quite different kind of meeting, really. It's the seeing things differently that triggers for me. A bunch of us from the Vivero Circle were invited to Giveth. I don't know how many people know about Giveth, but it's an organization that's kind of focusing in a different way of giving. And we were invited to present Vivero this morning, and there were 4 of us, and there were 2 other presenters. There were 4 Vivero presenters, and the 2 other organizations each had 1 person representing them. So it was a bit of an Earth Regenerator invasion, but it was really fascinating because this morning the meeting was early, but I just managed to catch a single article on Earth Regenerators before going to the meeting. It was actually a post from James. I don't know if other people have seen it in ER, James Dean, inviting us to think about how we could present the language of Joe's webinars in a way that makes it more accessible to people who identify as autists. And one of the other 2 organizations this morning being representative is something called Art XV, which is an organization, a non-profit founded to open the world of art and Web3 to autistic and other neurodivergent people. And I just loved the synchronicity of meeting Ava, who is such a live wire and so dedicated to this organization that's been founded, partly through her own experience of being the little sister to an older sister who's identified as autistic. And it strikes me at such a personal level, because having been involved with autistic people, young people, when I was living in Corsica, through them coming to do music workshops in the island, and then participating in the music festival that we hosted each year. and seeing the way that the presence of these young people within the festival was such a powerful, heartful, community making experience for people who wouldn't identify themselves necessarily as neurodivergent, was really, really powerful. So I'm on this thread now. I just responded to James before coming into the campfire to say, would you like to be our teacher? Because it seems to me that they know how to make the language accessible. They know what language would be accessible. And so there's the potential for this partnership, this alliance, if we can become the learners to the autistic ones, they can help us go with the messages out to a wider audience and community. And I'm imagining that Joe will have all kinds of ideas too, because he's so deeply imbued and embedded with kind of learning technology that I think it's a really exciting avenue for us to explore in Earth Regenerators. And just this whole seeing the world differently. I know when I'm in the company of people who identify as autistic, I find my horizons opening up. I think I'm pretty close to being on the spectrum myself, actually, because I'm always going in the opposite direction of groups that I find myself in. Oh, that's so interesting, Claire. That's yeah, we've got lots to discuss, you and me. The list is growing and growing and growing. I think we're going to have to spend a week together, aren't we? Thank you. That's me for now.
Diane, since you're new to campfires, I'll just let you know that we try to be comfortable with long pauses. It's a pregnant moment, if you will. It allows for things to arise that might not otherwise.
Well, maybe seeing that there is a pause and what Mehdi brought up, one of the things that when I started to really look at neurodivergence, and I like to call it that because really we're all on the spectrum. It's just that there's more things weighted on one side, and one of the things that I learned about, in fact, I learned about myself. I wasn't diagnosed until much later as an adult, and I was in my late 40s when I was diagnosed. But it was when I was trying to help my son, who is also on the spectrum and has ADD and a bunch of other learning things, and really even the learning disabilities, they're disabilities because the society we're in has narrowed everything so much that you're disabled trying to work like that. But you know, when people that are that have been some of the people who have really been able to think way outside the box, much of the time, you know, I started reading autobiographies because it was kind of the only way that I could see other people like me, because I didn't fit into what looked like autistic. And it was only when I was reading those autobiographies of people who were kind of the very creative thinkers that were way outside that I started to recognize that those were the things that I did. And because we're essentially anyone who doesn't fit into this very narrowed and can't perform in this very narrowed version of society that we've, you know, and it's getting narrower. I mean, yeah, is really ends up being discarded by society. So often, you know, they started looking at prisons, and 95% of prison populations they found were undiagnosed in learning or had learning disabilities. Many of them were undiagnosed, or they just basically became reactive and fell through the cracks, and then responded in socially inappropriate ways that then got them into trouble. And gosh, ended up in the prison system. So if you've got prison populations that are full of people that see the world differently, well, guess what? We actually need people who see the world in a way that we have been basically blind to. And I really believe that it's the neurodivergent people that we need more than anything right now, because we need people to kind of open our eyes to the way that we haven't been looking. So yeah, I could carry on for a long time. I won't, but I think there's just so much stuff that's coming up that is really worth looking at. It's barely in the common conversation. My husband is medical, and a lot of my family are, and they are so ignorant about neurodivergence. It's just absolutely shocking to see how poorly they've been educated about it. And that then perpetuates a myth that is just essentially about pathologizing people that think differently and behave differently. So anyway, I'll stop.
Diane.
I'm trying. Hi, sorry. I had to step away to deal with an apparent kitchen campfire here in the house, and I came back to hear you saying something about pauses, and I didn't know if I'd missed a prompt while I was out dealing with the local fire.
No, you're good. I was just
Okay.
We just had a long pause, and I was sharing that we try to make space for those and appreciate them. You're good.
Perfect. Thank you.
Well, how appropriate that we brought up the value of divergent opinions and outlier perspectives, because really that's one of the things that we try to really appreciate in this space, inspired by yarning, the Aboriginal social technology. I mean, reading Sand Talk, Tyson Yunkaporta clearly talks about the value of diversity and how it's not only the value, the essential addition of the outlier opinions, the importance of diversity in seeing things from all angles. And as we talk about, forming collective intelligence, that's absolutely necessary. Seeing things from all sides in order to understand the greatest representation that we can create of reality, and then moving forward with that. So Richard.
Yeah, and that's what Middy's been talking about, and Claire, that's been connecting with me today, and my work as a neuropsychologist. On my listserv today, in the ACT community, there've been lots of questions about whether ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, can be helpful for people with neurodivergence who are struggling because of the system, because it's not allowing them to their uniqueness to shine through, and that kind of links in so many other ways as well. Steve Hayes, founder of ACT, gave a very passionate presentation about psychometrics and the role of statistics, and how normal as a word only came into the dictionary in 1848, and this, the devastating effect it's had since then. And my whole training and underpinning as a neuropsychologist, doing cognitive tests on people that have this fallacy of normal underpinning them all. And I've got a teaching session with trainee psychologists in a couple of weeks, talking about attention and memory and psychometrics. And yeah, there's a whole, new way of seeing for me now, and I'm going to share that with them as well, to open their eyes to this whole fallacy of normal, and the complete error of and social misjustice, eugenics, everything that comes with normal distributions, and not appreciating the diversity, beauty of all of us. So thank you for Midi and Claire for sharing, and all of these things connecting.
What you trigger for me, Richard, is the idea that we could maybe have a subtitle for Earth Regenerators. There's the neurodivergent community for regeneration, and I only kind of quarterly jest, because I mean ACT is kind of embedded in the whole approach of pro-social, so it's kind of it's in our DNA almost as a network, and I just have this really strong memory of how spending a week with a group of youngsters from a day hospital in Paris when they came to the island of Corsica, and I was part of the music workshop that was hosting them, was really liberating for me, because what I discovered was it was really easy for me to communicate if I just watched, listened, felt the signals and responded without any kind of mental framework, just responded. It was such a lesson in presence, in terms of me letting go of anything other than I'm here to be in relationship with these people, and they're, my natural way of being in relationship is as a responder. So it was very natural for me to just be in the flow and respond, and it was liberating to me. It was like we were having this amazing week-long experience together, and the kind of crowning moment for me was when, at the end of a week music workshop, the youngsters performed a Corsican a cappella song, which they'd spent the week learning, in the local cathedral, to an audience of people who'd come and paid money to come to a music festival to listen to, kind of in quotes, professional musicians, and they were absolutely blown away by the singing that these kids produced. And even it was, what was extraordinary about it was even the notes that could have by classical music standards be considered out of tune were just a part of the whole. It was such a beautiful experience. And those concerts, when you go to a concert and the musicians have really connected with the audience, and you have this sense of just being in one love bath, basically. That was what happened that day in Calvi, and just stays with me forever. I can be back there in a trice. Thank you.
Yeah, Medi, I thank you so much for bringing that up. And it just prompted for me what Preston had said when you were doing your check-in about arriving wearing your sweatshirt with the land back piece. And it just reminded me of, in South Africa during apartheid, I had actually refused to wear anti-apartheid t-shirts, because what I realized is that it allowed others to pigeonhole me. And and it actually shut down any conversations. And I wanted to be taken on my own terms. I didn't want the kind of border that was around what it meant to be anti-apartheid. There was so much more nuance. And I think what you're saying, Nidhi, is that we tend to put these domains around something, whatever it is. It's actually all on a continuum. In fact, that's what I'm realizing I'm struggling with. Like even talking about community art, it's on a continuum. It's not disconnected from the community meals. It's not disconnected from the relationship with the animals that you're encountering. They're all, so when you say community art, it's like it puts this boundary on it, and it makes it so that it's actually not this flow that you've just so beautifully described. And I think if I really think about it, you know, in order to have, sorry, I'm doing a big switch here, but in order to have law and being able to win an argument, you have to put a boundary around it. It has a narrative. It's kind of as watertight as you can make it so that you can control it and do whatever. And, you know, languages that are noun-based are kind of that way oriented. And verb-based languages are much more what you were describing, which is we're doing, with people who are doing shifting, changing. Nothing is as static as something that has a concrete boundary around it. And I think just challenging how we think about the world as this interacting relationships that are continually changing. Yeah, sort of really working at breaking down those labels. And so even I love the term neurodivergent because it does have more of a sense of continuum. But at the same time, like the trap of falling into putting a label on something is, it's like it needs to be a way of talking rather than, anyway, I'll stop. But thank you.
It reminds me how everything so much is about framing and standardization. I remember during my formative years, I would always hear people speak in sort of community, and I would immediately realize that I didn't agree. And so much of my youth voice was spent not disagreeing because I didn't have enough of a foundation to be willing to speak against that, particularly in a rural community. It's fairly unfriendly in those circumstances. So when I went off to university, it was such a joyous moment in life at that time, because you could be of a different opinion. You could throw it out there. I remember wearing kilts to school, and I wasn't Scottish. The whole point was always to get people talking, thinking, because we live in these worlds that aren't realities at all. They're just very simplified constructs. And we have a very hard time with those broader perspectives. But times of challenge, like we are more and more living through, you need broader perspective, because these standardizations have got us to where we're at, where all these things are collapsing, the systems are no longer working, people are falling between the cracks, whether it's homelessness or otherwise. It's all the same grander picture story. And so listening to this is very comfortable. It's very nice to be able to not actually have to think about what anybody expects to hear. I don't feel my heart racing because, you know, oh, I'm now going to say something that, you know, may not go over very well. I love Earth Regenerators because I just come in as I am, and what responds in the moment comes out. And we have these wonderful opportunities to have 6, 8, 10, 12 different voices exploring things. You know, I forget something, somebody else draws it in or brings it in a new direction. And it's just this beauty of collective thinking and processing that doesn't really happen, I find, outside of, you know, very, very narrow frameworks. So yeah, I think the neurodivergence aspect was that, other than being diagnosed with ADHD at about 6 years old, I've never been tested for anything more, but there's a very good chance that I'd fall into one of the categories. I remember with my nephew lived with us for about 10 years, and he had a lot of challenges. And I would always just say, you know, I see a lot of what supposedly is normal, and I'm not very comfortable with normal. So being outside of normal is just fine. Because look what normal's doing. You know, it's like the word civilization right now. Look what civilization is doing. I'm not sure what the word really means, but I see what it's doing. And there's, yeah, these are disconnects that, yeah, we have constructs and they're just wrong. Anyway, I'll leave it there.
Truth.
Normal is absolutely insane. So
But
we,
it has such interesting results to if we follow through with this. So, for example, in the governance group, the governance jam, there's been this recent, wanting to codify protocols. And the minute we codify protocols, we create the other side of the protocol. We kind of say this is the way to be, and it's what, on the one hand, I recognize that it's really helpful for newcomers to Earth Regenerators to have a sense of, oh, this tends to be the way that things happen around here. But actually, the way we do things around here varies from one group to another quite a lot. There's probably at least as much variation as similarity. And I kind of, I just want to find the way that we can use these as useful guidelines without them becoming weapons that we then hit people over the head with if they don't conform to the norm that we've just created. It's a whole paradox at the edge of the network, I think.
I'm noticing the time, and I'd love to hear from Diane, and I think we'll wrap up after that. Diane, over to you.
Thank you. I just would like to appreciate everything that everybody's contributed to this particular conversation. And I just want to try to quickly report that it resonates with me, having sat on the ad hoc and now the standing committee for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and protocol development within the context of Society for Ecological Restoration International. And when we started on the ad hoc committee, our task with which we were, tasked was to set up codes of conduct and all this language-based stuff that was very difficult. And there was all these sort of lists of, laundry lists of things that we would include you, even if you're this problem, and we had to figure out how to completely withdraw from problematizing this ever-growing list of abnormal and figure out how to change our language of all our, protocol documents, policy documents, and back out of it to come on in, and we are not putting labels on. And yeah, so that's how we've gone so far.
That's so wonderful to hear, Diane. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good note to end on too. Thank you. Yeah. Is there any other parting words anyone would like to throw in? Are we feeling pretty complete?
Lots of gratitude to this conversation. Thank you.
Me too. Yeah. It's good to meet you, Diane.
Yeah.
Thanks for stopping by, Meaty. Preston, you're dependable.
Thank you for hosting.
Nice
Benji.
to meet everybody, and thanks for looping me into this, Preston.
We'll see y'all soon. We'll do it again Saturday.
Looking forward to it.
Bye.